Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, when we look at fields around the area as combining has begun, we see all kinds of residue out in the field. And how is that residue going to break down? How can you utilize that residue for next year's crop? We'll talk about it.
Well, one of the things that could go into that just a little bit is sulfur, and we want to discuss sulfur a little bit today as well, because it's a nutrient you may not have been fertilizing much with in corn or soybeans or wheat, but it's something those crops need a lot of. So we'll explain that more today.
One thing farmers are still fighting is our weed of the week, but first here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss compaction.
It's interesting as we stand here at the edge of a field, and when we think about compacted areas of fields, this is where all the traffic comes into the field and goes out of the field, or everybody turns around at the end of the field, and there's oftentimes a lot of compaction at the end of the field. Now, if you're not familiar with that term compaction, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's that ground gets compacted or pressed down because of all that weight from the vehicles that are driving in the field, and then just the multiple passes that get made right over the edges of the field.
So scientifically, what we're talking about here is soil density, and when we've squeezed out a lot of the air and moisture in some cases too, all there is left is soil, and that's not a good thing, because ideally as farmers what we're looking for here is about half soil, 25% water and 25% air. Well, when we don't have that 25% air anymore, it gets really difficult for roots to be growing in there, and especially when that soil is pressed down so hard, roots can't penetrate through very high soil densities. Now we've got a real problem out in our fields.
Well, there's a couple different problems there. Not only can crops not grow very well in those compacted areas, but water doesn't infiltrate into those areas very well either. Many times when we have compacted areas at the ends of fields, when we get heavy rains, those rains are forced to run off the field, oftentimes leading to erosion issues.
Well, speaking of that, one of the things that can cause compaction is moisture. So if there's a lot of rain that keeps coming down on the ground and it doesn't have anywhere to go, then that can press that soil down as well. So one of the things farmers will do to improve this compaction is they will put tile drainage down below the ground. Part of the whole thing too is farmers should never drive on wet soil. That's a rule that we learned as kids. Now, obviously, we don't live in a perfect world. Sometimes as farmers, we have to go out in wetter conditions, but ideally, we don't like the soil wet. When the soil is wet, it can get compacted much easier. So again, if we have tile in the ground to lower the water table, we don't have so much water in the top 2 or 3 feet of soil, and we don't create quite as much compaction.
Well, the other thing, Brian, you talked about rainfall hitting that soil and just pounding it. By leaving a little bit of crop residue on the soil surface, we can lessen the impact of those raindrops. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You say, what are you talking about? I love walking out in the rain. That rain isn't hitting me that hard, but it really does hit those tiny little soil particles pretty hard. So by leaving residue out like corn stalks or soybean stubble or wheat straw out in a field, now you have something to lessen the blow of that water, and also when the water hits, it doesn't splash up soil, it just hits off that residue and spreads out.
The other thing farmers will do to try to reduce compaction over a long period of time is increase organic matter levels in soil. Farmers are able to do that by raising crops with lots of roots like corn and wheat and reducing their tillage, going to things like no-till or strip-till. So when they do that over a long period of time, again, they will increase their organic matter level in soil, so the soil becomes almost like a sponge. So it can bounce back if there is a little bit of weight that does go on the soil with a tractor tire or with rainfall. So we want that sponge effect in the soil. Having high organic matter helps that soil to respond.
Now, one other thing that farmers can do, kind of in a natural sense to reduce compaction, is grow crops that have deep roots. And many times for farmers that are raising a crop like soybeans, for example, they may come back in after that soybean crop and plant a deep-rooted crop as a cover crop, just to pass the time over until the next time they're going to be planting another production crop on their farm, using a crop like, say, tillage radishes, where you're putting out a crop that has a big, strong root that's going to actually break through some of those compacted areas, is a natural way for farmers to break through compaction without having to do the last option, heavy, deep tillage.
Yeah, so what farmers will do to try to reduce compaction, and they can do this in the top few inches of soil, is this heavy tillage. Things like plowing, for example, or even chisel plowing. But what happens a lot of times is they will basically move the compaction layer down a little bit deeper in the soil. So what we've gone to on our farm is we'll use a practice we call zone building. We're going out with straight shanks that are deep, roughly 20 inches, and they're narrow. So all we're trying to do is cut slots in the soil to allow the roots to go down deep. We're not eliminating all compaction in soil. You can never eliminate it all, it seems like. And with that practice, we're able to have much deeper roots in all the crops that we raise.
Well, farmers are busy out in their fields right now harvesting their crops, but one thing they're very concerned about is compacting the soil. That's where we actually have so much weight on the soil that it squishes out the air and that soil becomes much more dense. Farmers need to get that fixed in order to grow a great crop next year.
Well, another thing they need to do to grow a great crop is stop our weed of the week. We'll tell you how to do it on your farm coming up later in the show.
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans, an advanced soybean product with tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate. Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans. Extend your control.
At Case IH, our equipment doesn't just meet the standards, it set them. With industry-leading SCR engine technology, Case IH gives you more power while still meeting tough emission standards. In fact, the Steiger 620 is the highest horsepower tractor to ever come off the assembly line. And all Case IH equipment is agronomically designed to help you maximize your yield potential and your profits. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready? Learn more at caseih.com/efficientpower.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pea. Most of your applied pea gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pea available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pea availability can lead to increased pea uptake in the plant. That's more pea, and more pea. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pea with Avail.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's ahead above the rest.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, Agro Liquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
One of the most important things that farmers deal with every fall is residue breakdown. And it's not a big deal in a lot of cases, like when we've got soybean crop here, there's not that much residue. But when you've got, let's say, continuous corn or even continuous wheat, there is a tremendous amount of residue out there, and it's how you're going to deal with that. How quickly can we get that to break down?
Well, it's interesting that you note the differences between crops. For example, with soybeans, there's quite a bit of nitrogen in this crop residue because we're talking about a legume crop here that actually produces its own nitrogen. When you're talking about corn or wheat, those are crops that are very high in carbon and very low in nitrogen. And in order for that residue to break down, it's going to be broken down by the microbes in the soil. And they need to have a good amount of nitrogen out there to blend with that carbon to be able to break down residue.
But it's not just that, obviously. I mean, when you look at a corn plant, that corn plant is huge. There's a lot of overall mass to it. With a soybean plant, I mean, how much do we really have left when it's all said and done? By the time it goes through the combine, you know, there's a little bit of stuff on the ground, but it's no big deal. But to Darren's point, with that residue, it seems like the soybean residue disappears very quickly, and that's the reason why, is because it does have a fair amount of nitrogen in it.
Well, when you think about corn stalks, for example, how many tons are going to be out there per acre? There's quite a few. few. If you were to bale them up, you'd get quite a few bales per acre. So when we're looking at that residue and thinking about the weight of that residue, also think about that carbon to nitrogen ratio that I started talking about. With corn stalks, it's typically about 60 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And for the microbes in the soil to break it down, we need to get that ratio down to about 12 or 13 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So you can see why it's so important when we're trying to break down corn residue to add a little bit of nitrogen to the equation. Now many farmers will say right behind the combine, they like to come and put just a little bit of nitrogen out there, or if they start spreading manure out on those corn stalks, something like that that has quite a bit of nitrogen in it, they can begin that breakdown process a little bit earlier. On our farm, by the time we're getting our corn out of the field, a lot of times the snow is coming very shortly after, and we don't have a lot of time to get residue breakdown. So it all depends on how early that harvest is as to how much breakdown you can start to get occurring in the fall.
Yeah, but the other thing is, in a lot of our corn residue, we already have a fair amount of nitrogen. We try never to short that corn plant on nitrogen. So if your corn stalks have a fair amount of nitrogen in them, and also sulfur, because sulfur works in conjunction with nitrogen. Basically, sulfur helps nitrogen be more available, more useful in that plant. So if we have a good nitrogen to sulfur ratio as well, we get a little bit faster breakdown of stalks. The other thing is microbial activity, beneficial bacteria and fungi. If you have those living well in your soil, in other words, if your soil has a relatively neutral pH, if it's not waterlogged, if it has a fair amount of air in it, if it has balanced nutrients overall, if all those things are right and not too much compaction would be another thing I could throw in there, then we're going to have good microbial activity. You're also going to have much faster breakdown of any residue you have.
One other thing that we do on our farm that's a little different than other farms, and there are many farms that are doing this now too, I'm not saying we're the only ones, we're using a chopping corn head, and by doing that, we're sizing up that residue. We're getting the pieces down to maybe 4-inch chunks, maybe 6-inch chunks, but by slicing the ends of that, now you can start to see the microbial activity working in from the sides rather than having a big long piece with all that lignin on the outside of the stalk that kind of holds that fungus outside the plant, where it's taking a little bit longer to get into the core of that stalk.
Well, that's the whole thing, is opening that up. So you want to expose the center of that. Another thing that you can do to get that residue going, which a lot of people will do, is tillage. Now, we're not real big proponents of full-scale tillage just because over time you can reduce your organic matter levels in soil. But doing a little bit of light tillage, so maybe running over with a sulfur machine or a super coulter or a twister, something like that, to get a little bit of soil mixed with that residue, that will be a good thing and speed that breakdown as well.
All right, now you said something a little bit ago about tillage speeding up that breakdown of residue, but also potentially reducing organic matter levels in soil over time.
This is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this years ago either. I just thought, oh boy, if you have corn or wheat where you have all kinds of residue, you throw that into the ground, over time you're going to build your organic matter. No, you're not. You're going to deplete your organic matter levels. That's been proven over time. If you look at the last 100 years in the United States, our organic matter levels have continued to fall, and it's because of tillage. So we want to reduce tillage as much as we can, and I'm not saying you have to go complete no-till or anything to do this, but you want to reduce your tillage, eliminate the plow, that kind of thing, and you will over time, hopefully, increase your organic matter levels. And you know, I've never really fully understood why this is either. I talked to soil scientists about it, and here's the explanation in very simple terms they've given me. They say, look, when you do full-scale tillage like a moldboard plow, it's like throwing fuel on the fire. You get so much oxygen there, and it just burns up that organic matter in the soil way quicker than what we want. So over time, we'd like to see organic matter levels increasing in soil. When organic matter levels are higher, you get so many good things in your soil, like compaction reduction. You can hold more water, you can hold more nutrients. You just have a much more rich soil. So we want to increase the organic matter levels, not decrease them.
All right, now we talk about you may want to reduce tillage. This is something for your farm that you've got to think about, and that's really what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to tell you how to farm on your farm. You know how to farm on your farm. But we're just saying, think about some of these different concepts that, hey, if I want to build up my organic matter, maybe I should consider making some changes to what I'm doing.
But the reason why most guys do tillage is because they want that residue gone. So that's the reason why we're talking about all this today. So it's making sure you have ample nitrogen and sulfur out there, have a neutral pH, have balanced nutrients. You want to have good microbial activity, and maybe do just a little bit of light tillage. Use a chopping corn head. All these things will speed that residue breakdown up without having to destroy your organic matter level.
All right, and if you want to check in your fields where your organic matter matter levels are at versus where they were historically, go right into the fence line. Pull a soil sample in the fence line where you've got some grass that's been growing and that area has been undisturbed probably forever, depending on where you're farming. So pull a sample out of the fence line, then pull a sample out in the middle of the field and just see where you're at. Many times we'll see guys with organic matter levels of 5 or 6% in the fence line, but out in the field they may be down to 1, 2, or 3%. So we know that we've burned up some of that organic matter over the years with the practices we're using. Now it's certainly possible to get those levels back up. We've got some of our ground that we've built back up into the 5s in organic matter now, where it's almost as good as it was in the fence line, and we're still working on that. That's our goal. We want to get back to where this ground was productivity-wise when we first started farming it way back 100 years or more ago.
Well, once again, it's very important how you deal with the residue in terms of what kind of crop you're going to raise in the future. It's also very important that you control weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers.
Upgrade your trailer to electric with the Rolltech electric system from AgriCover. Strong, flexible pivot arms and motor mount rotate and telescope, allowing the roll tube to rise and flex over heaped loads. The positive automatic lock is impossible to back off to control the flow of grain. This integrated system uses one wireless remote to operate up to 10 tarps and hoppers, keeping your driver out of the dust, rain, and harm's way. See the Rolltech system in action at an AgriCover dealer near you.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving in rocks and has contour conformity equaling 0 downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
At Titan Machinery and Case IH, we offer better solutions for all your production needs. It's more than our job, it's who we are. We are parts. We are service. We are training. And most importantly, we are here for you. In any season, for every reason, we've got you covered. Case IH and Titan Machinery, better solutions.
One of the most important nutrients for your crops is sulfur, but it's not talked about all that often, in part, I think, because we used to get all the free sulfur we needed from air pollution. Well, now that our air is cleaner and the fact that our yields are going higher, you need to add sulfur to most of your crops every single year.
Well, I liked what you said there, Brandon. The air is cleaner, that's a positive. Our yields are higher, that's a positive. So what? We got to spend just a little bit more money on fertilizer.
Yeah, but the point is people aren't doing it. I mean, are you putting sulfur out on your crop every year like you need to? I mean, don't forget, soybeans need a lot of sulfur too, okay? So if you're just fertilizing your corn, you figure, oh, I have enough left over from my soybeans.
Well, and
probably
that is a common
not,
mistake.
because sulfur, nitrogen, and boron are leachable. So if you've got a crop that needs a lot of one of those nutrients, you've got to fertilize every single year, not every other year or every 4th year with sulfur.
I see many guys doing that though, Brian, where they're looking at grass crops are going to need the sulfur. I'm going to put it out on my wheat. I'm going to put it out on my corn, and they forget about soybeans and sunflowers and some of the broadleaf crops out there because they think, oh, I don't need as much sulfur, but it all depends on what your yield goal is.
Well, you need sulfur no matter what. The point is you need more the higher your yield yield goal is. So a lot of guys are complaining because, well, I'm only getting 40 or 50 bushel beans just like I did 30 years ago. Well, you know what? We've raised some 75 bushel beans on our farm, but you know how many pounds of sulfur 75 bushel soybeans need? About 30 pounds of sulfur. Well, if you're not putting out at least 10 or 15 pounds of sulfur to supplement what your organic matter is releasing every year, how is that sulfur going to get there? It's not just magically going to appear. So you've got to fertilize for what that crop needs.
Now, how do we get the sulfur out there? Because a lot of guys will say, well, I've been using ammonium thiosulfate as a carrier for my pre-corn herbicide. What can I do in soybeans to get sulfur out there?
Well, there are a whole bunch of ways you can get sulfur out there, and you can use it as a carrier for your soybean herbicide too. That's what we do on our farm. If we're going to put Prowl or Sonalan or Treflan or sometimes even Valor Authority out there, we're using fertilizer as the carrier. So yeah, you can use ammonium thiosulfate. You can use dry ammonium sulfate. But you can also get sulfur out there with manure. Lime sources. There are a lot of lime sources that will have a bunch of sulfur in there. There are a whole bunch of different ways. So many fertilizers do have sulfur in there, even some 1050O that you may say, well, it's just MAP, it's just nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, talk to your fertilizer dealer. In some of those MAP sources, there's also some sulfur in there. So there are a lot of different ways to get it out there. You just may have to be a little bit creative. And again, you don't need a whole lot. Your soil's probably already got a little. Your organic matter is going to release some during the year. You might only need an additional 5 or 10 pounds to raise a great soybean crop. Just don't forget about it.
All right, the immediate question is, do I put it on in the fall, or am I so worried about leaching I need to wait till spring?
That's a good question. Depends on your area. In our area, we don't get much rain in the fall or the spring, or for that matter, the summer. So I don't really care. I'll throw it out in the fall. But if you're in an area that gets heavy rainfall and you don't have a big time winter like we do, so you have water moving in the soil all through the winter time, you're probably going to want to wait with that sulfur until spring.
Well, sulfur is certainly an important nutrient. It's not N, P, and K, the primary nutrients, but it is in the class of the secondary nutrients, which are very important for crops, and you do need a substantial amount. So don't forget sulfur in your fertilizer program this year.
Well, another thing not to forget is to control weeds, like our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to do it coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Your farm tells a story, one that continues with the decisions you make. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our Weed of the Week is cattails.
Well, that has to be your favorite weed, Brian, because whenever you see cattails in a field, you get excited.
Well, let's put it this way. If I see cattails, chances are I've got a drainage problem out there. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying go out and destroy all your true wetlands, you know, the duck ponds and that kind of thing. But if you have allowed some cattails to grow out in normal crop ground that you usually farm, you need to get those things under control. And the way you do that is with a high rate of Roundup and a low rate of water. So use the maximum labeled rate of Roundup, the lowest possible water amount. The reason why you're doing this is cattails have a very waxy leaf surface. We can't stick much on that leaf surface, so you've got to have a very concentrated droplet.
Well, unfortunately with cattails, there aren't a whole lot of other control options. It's usually found in areas that are fairly wet. So if there is some water in those areas and you're trying to kill cattails, you may have to use a special kind of Roundup that's allowed to be sprayed right over water.
Yeah, an aquatic Roundup, so something like rodeo. But again, I guess we look at cattails, usually they're just in wetter areas, so if you can fix your drainage problem, the cattails will go away over time. But they are a perennial weed. They are difficult to control. We want to get as much Roundup on them as we can, and we've had good success doing that on our farm as long as we keep the water rate low.
That's all time we have for this week's weed, but there's more Ag PhD to come after this.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
Perhaps the biggest challenge for farmers over the years has been the fact that there are so many things that a farmer must do correctly in order to make a profit. You need to be a mechanic, a grain marketer, a top-notch agronomist, a great machinery operator, and have many more skills as well. In today's Iron Talk, we'll discuss how you can tell if you're doing one of your fall jobs just right. We'll look at the best way to determine if you're doing deep tillage successfully on your farm. Whether you're farming way up north, have heavy soils that you feel need tillage, or you just have a ton of residue to deal with, if deep tillage is one of those jobs you need to do in the fall, it's important that you do it correctly so you're not wasting your time or making things worse on your farm. The one tool that you need to carry with you when walking fields or doing tillage is a spade. I prefer a tile spade, and here's what you do. Just go out behind your deep tillage implement, put the shovel in the ground, and stand on it. If the shovel goes all the way down into the soil, chances are your tillage has been successful in breaking up the compaction that you have. A few years back, I was in Eastern Europe in the Ukraine. Our group stopped at a field where a farm worker was doing some deep tillage. I went behind his tractor and a deep ripper, and I brought my shovel. And the shovel would only go in about 6 inches deep, and it stopped. The operator needed to make some adjustments to the tillage implement to get it deeper. That meant he needed either more horsepower to do the job, or he needed to slow down. Once he made those changes, he was breaking up the compaction layer and heading towards higher yields for next year. So this fall, whether you've done your tillage already or not, take a spade out in your fields and check to see where that hardpan is. You'll have better results from your tillage and better yields next year. That's it for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
At Case IH, our equipment doesn't just meet the standards, it set them. With industry-leading SCR engine technology, Case IH gives you more power while still meeting tough emission standards. In fact, the Steiger 620 is the highest horsepower tractor to ever come off the assembly line. And all Case IH equipment is agronomically designed to help you maximize your yield potential and your profits. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready? Learn more at caseih.com/efficientpower.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pee. Most of your applied pee gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pee available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pee availability can lead to increased pee uptake in the plant. That's more pee, and more pee. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pee with Avail.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Farmers focus on controlling weeds in their fields in order to produce more food. Abundant food supplies help Americans spend less of their income on food than nearly any other country in the world. To learn how farmers do it, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.